Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for the entire year ahead for Aquarius and Aquarius rising for the year of 2023. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So my horoscopes are meant to be read primarily from the perspective of your rising sign, which should be Aquarius, although you can also look at them from the perspective of your sun sign, especially if you're born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you're born at night. So here's some of the main transits that I want to talk about here in this forecast that are what I think are the major planetary alignments next year and some of the dates associated with them. The very first one I want to talk about is as soon as the year opens in 2023, we're going to be finishing up the Mars retrograde period in Gemini in your fifth house. So the fifth house traditionally has to do with topics such as children, creativity, pleasure, hobbies such as different fun and games, as well as sex, sexuality, and romance. So Mars retrograde periods can sometimes be kind of contentious, and it can bring some tensions to this area of your life, where sometimes it's just a matter of putting a lot more emphasis or a lot more energy into this area for some reason. But other times, especially for those of you born with day charts, it may be a period in which you come into some conflicts or have some difficulties or setbacks in this area for some reason. So this transit actually began way back in August, as soon as Mars went into the sign of Gemini, but it really intensified towards the end of October when Mars slowed down and stationed retrograde on October 30th. And then it's been slowly moving backwards through the degrees in Gemini over the course of the past several weeks until eventually on January 12th, 2023, Mars is going to station direct and begin moving forward again until eventually it departs from Gemini and the transit will be completely over in around March 25th of 2023. So for many of you, this is going to be a storyline that you're already familiar with because it's already developed for the most part in the entire second half of 2022, and it's just going to be brought to some sort of completion or conclusion in the first 3 months of 2023. So for some of you, if you have children, this may have been a period of conflict or tension with them. Others, there may have been some issues when it comes to fun and games and things that you usually do for like hobbies or leisurely activities. There may have been more tension around during this time, but whatever it is, wrapping up some of that tension should be part of the initial phase of 2023. So moving into other areas, another major transit that's taking place that's actually a big deal for you with Aquarius and Aquarius rising is that Saturn is going to be departing from Aquarius and completing a 3-year transit through your first house of mind, body, and self. So for some of you, this may have coincided, a Saturn transit through the first house can coincide with health issues because Saturn typically represents surmountable difficulties that come up as sort of obstacles or setbacks, either for you physically or in some instances mentally. Saturn can make things slow down and move much more slowly, or it can make you feel like you've aged a lot more in a relatively short span of time. The good news is that this transit, which started way back in March of 2020, is finally coming to an end in March of 2023, and then Saturn is going to move into your second house of finances and possessions. So this is going to start a period where things may be a little bit more maybe a little bit more serious, or a little bit more heavy, or even having some constriction or consolidation surrounding your finances over the course of the next few years, because this transit, it's going to start in March of 2023, but it's going to last all the way until 2026. So for many of you, it may begin a period of needing to restructure your finances and learning how to deal with less a little bit, or learning how to spend money a little bit more wisely and a bit more pragmatically would be one of my main pieces of advice for that transit. So that's going to begin in March and it's going to last through the end of the year. And then you're going to experience that transit more or less intensely at different points over the course of the next 3 years. All right, so that's the Saturn transit. The next transit is that Pluto is going to dip into Aquarius, which is your first house, for just a few months between March 23rd and June 11th. So this is going to be a period in which you're going to have more of an intense and transformational focus on either topics related to your mind or topics related to your body and your sense of self. So when Pluto becomes prominent in a person's birth chart, especially when it hits the angles, it sometimes brings to the forefront issues of how one wields and exercises power, and the ways in which, when you're put in a position of power, if you're able to use that power and wield it effectively in a way that's just and sort of moral, or if you run into issues with control, manipulation, or power plays in your life in different ways. So this is going to be a long-term transit because Pluto is going to be going through Aquarius for the next 20 years, all the way through the 2040s. But we're just going to get a very brief 3-month preview of it as soon as Pluto goes into Aquarius here in March. So pay attention to any themes that come up in that time during that 3-month period, because they may end up being much more important long-term themes than they may seem like at first. All right. Moving on, some of the more positive transits that I wanted to talk about that are happening for you this year is that Jupiter is about to go into Aries here in December of 2022, and it's going to be transiting through that sign and transiting through your 3rd house for the first 5 months of 2023, all the way through mid-May. So the 3rd house has to do with siblings, neighbors, extended family such as aunts, uncles, and cousins. It also has to do with short distance travel like your car or getting around town. And the 3rd house especially has to do with communication. So this should indicate a 5-month period of growth and expansion when it comes to communication, where you learn how to communicate more effectively and potentially also more optimistically, because Jupiter likes to bring a sense of optimism and growth to whatever area of the chart that it transits. If you have siblings, it may also be a period in which either there's positive things happening in the lives of your siblings, or in which your relationship with your siblings goes through a particularly positive period. This can also apply to other 3rd house figures, such as your extended family and relatives, or alternatively, even positive developments happening with respect to neighbors or people that live in close proximity to you can be the benefactors of 3rd house transits. So pay attention to all of those areas. Finally, the 3rd house, as short distance travel, can be something positive with respect to how you get around town, such as getting a new car or having some sort of major transition in terms of just your mobility in general. All right, so after that transit's over, Jupiter is going to depart from Aries in mid-May, and it's going to move into Taurus, which is your 4th house of home, family, private life, and parents. So the 2 primary areas that this will impact is your home and living situation, and it will indicate a relatively positive period for your living situation in the 2nd half of 2023, where there's some sort of positive developments of growth and expansion in that area. So for some of you, this may be moving into a new home, or having some sort of fresh start with your living situation, or having some sort of sudden windfall that positively impacts your home and just the home environment. Alternatively, the 4th house is also the place of your parents, and sometimes this can indicate some positive or fortuitous events taking place in your parents' lives, or alternatively, just that there's something about your relationship with your parents that improves and gets better and is stabilized around this time, especially if there's been anything that's been up in the air, or if you've had any problems with that in previous recent years. So that transit's going to happen in the entire 2nd half of the year. Moving on to other benefic transits, another one that's happening that's going to be one of the hallmarks of 2023 that looks more positive is there's going to be a Venus retrograde period in the sign of Leo, which is your 7th whole sign house. So the 7th house is over here. So a Venus retrograde, and this is going to start in June as soon as Venus moves into the sign of Leo, but it's really going to intensify around July 22nd, when Venus slows down and stations retrograde and begins moving backwards in the signs of the zodiac, or in the degrees of the zodiac in that sign of Leo, until it eventually stations direct on September 3rd, and then the transit will officially end about a month later in early October when Venus departs from Leo. So Venus is the planet of love and relationships, and the seventh house is the house or the sector of your chart that has to do with relationships, marriage, and partnership in general. So this should be a relatively positive period for relationships where for some reason the topic of relationships and love and romance is dominating this several month period in your life. For those of you with night charts, that should indicate some positive sort of romantic encounters in terms of new relationships or going back and revisiting old relationships, because retrograde periods often have this backwards looking orientation because Venus literally starts retracing her steps and moving backwards in the sky. So for some of you, there may be relationships from the past that come back into your life so that you have to reassess whether you'd like to make amends with somebody from the past or reconnect with somebody from the past. And there may be a strong tendency to sort of reignite some old flames potentially. Alternatively, it could just be an important turning point in current relationships where you work through and smooth over some difficulties that have come up recently or in the past in order to start moving forward again with a greater sense of unity and a greater sense of purpose in your current relationship. But generally speaking, that should be a pretty positive relationship transit that's happening for several months during the course of the summer. All right, moving on. The last major thing I want to talk about in this forecast is the eclipses that are going to take place this year. So the first set of eclipses are going to take place in Aries and Scorpio in April and May. So Aries is the third house of communication for you, and I think this is just emphasizing some of the third house communication transits that I was talking about earlier, but here bringing a sense of major beginnings and major endings in this sector of your life that will sort of complement the Jupiter transit that I mentioned earlier in the themes of growth and expansion when it comes to siblings, neighbors, communication, or short distance travel. The other area that's being activated there in that time period is Scorpio in your 10th house, which is the house of career. So this should represent a major beginning or a major ending when it comes to career matters for you. And this is actually a continuation of an eclipse series and a sequence of events that you've already been experiencing for more than a year now, because there's been 2 other eclipses in the sign of Scorpio in your 10th house of career during the course of 2022. One of them was in October and the other was in like April or May. So major beginnings and major endings when it comes to your career, your reputation, and your overall life direction. Sometimes some people will end or wrap up a job or a career at this time and sort of wind down and transition into a new phase of life or into a new career. Other people will just start a new job or start heading in a brand new career direction at this time, with eclipses taking place in the 10th house. For many of you, because this is the final eclipse in Scorpio, it may be the continuation and completion of a set of circumstances and a sort of direction that began more than a year ago in terms of heading in this new direction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something new that comes out of nowhere, but instead it should just be bringing to completion a sequence of events that have already largely built up and taken place already and gained a lot of momentum prior to moving into this year. So yeah, 10th house career. All right, moving on to other eclipses this year. That's the first 2 set of eclipses. The next pair of eclipses are both going to take place in October. One of them is going to take place in Libra in your 9th house of education and philosophy, beliefs, and foreign travel, and should indicate some major beginnings and major endings with respect to those topics. And then the second eclipse in October is going to take place in Taurus in your 4th house of home and living situation. So the 9th house eclipse, major beginnings, major endings with respect to 9th house topics. So the 9th house especially has to do with beliefs and whatever our beliefs are, which can be religious beliefs, it can be philosophical beliefs, it can also be moral beliefs as well, or political beliefs. So for many of you, you may see some major changes in this area where you go through a sort of like transitional state and you start learning something new, or you start developing some new beliefs about how the world works and what your place is in it. And that doesn't necessarily have to be positive or negative. It just signifies some sort of shift or change in the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new chapter at that time. And we'll see that pick up and actually continue as a theme into 2024, because there's going to be more eclipses taking place between Libra and Aries, which are the two houses that represent what you've learned and what you believe versus how you communicate that to other people. So the second eclipse, though, is happening in Taurus in October, and that's your fourth house of home, living situation, and parents. And that should represent a major beginning or major ending with respect to your either living situation or your relationship with your parents. But again, since this is the final eclipse that's taking place in Taurus, it's actually completing an eclipse series and a sequence of events that started way back in late 2021 when we had the first eclipse in the sign of Taurus. So I think this is going to be bringing to completion a series of changes and transitions, rather than opening up something that's brand new, that's kind of like unexpected. But it should be relatively positive, because at the same time, you'll still be experiencing that Jupiter transit of growth and expansion in your fourth house when it comes to home and living situation and parents. So I think it'll be sort of like a positive ending or positive conclusion to that sequence of events, rather than something that's necessarily more difficult or problematic, even though eclipses sometimes do have a sort of chaotic feel to them sometimes, where things suddenly are up in the air or uncertain for a period of time. But generally it should be positive with respect to home and living situation. So I think that is it, though, in terms of the major transits that I wanted to cover today. So to summarize, some of the main topics or areas of life that should be prominent for you in different ways during the course of this year are the fifth house and children, creativity, and romance, the second house of finances due to that Saturn transit, the third house of communication due to Jupiter and the eclipse in Aries, the fourth house of home, living situation, and parents due to the eclipse and the Jupiter transit in Taurus, and finally the 10th house of career due to that eclipse that's going to take place in the sign of Scorpio. All right, so that's it for this forecast for 2023. Good luck and have a great year. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks everyone that joined me in the live chat. I'm going to answer a few questions here today in the live chat as I run the credits. So thanks a lot for watching. Good luck this year, and I'll see you again next year. Help to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including Thomas Miller, Catherine Conroy, Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Mimi Stargazer, and Jean-Marie Kaplan. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then please consider becoming a patron through our page on patreon.com. In exchange, you can get access to bonus content that's only available to patrons of the podcast, such as early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the monthly forecast episodes, our monthly auspicious elections podcast, or another exclusive podcast series called the Casual Astrology Podcast, or you can even get your name listed in the credits at the end of each episode. For more information, visit patreon.com/astrologypodcast. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, we have a list of recommended astrologers at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrologers on the list are friends of the podcast that have been featured in different episodes over the years, and they have different specialties such as natal astrology, electional astrology, synastry, rectification, or horary astrology. You can get a 10% discount when you book a consultation with one of the astrologers on our list by using the promo code AstrologyPodcast. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called Astro Gold for Mac OS, which is from the creators of SolarFire for PC, and it includes both modern and traditional techniques. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount. If you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I'd recommend checking out my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, where I go over the history, philosophy, and techniques of ancient astrology, taking people from beginner up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. You can get a print copy of the book through Amazon or other online retailers, or there's an ebook version available through Google Books. I also recently published a new translation of the anthology of the 2nd century astrologer Vedius Valens, which is one of the most important sources for understanding the practice of ancient astrology. You can find that by searching for Vedius Valens, the anthology, on Amazon or other online book retailers. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, as well as guided readings of ancient texts, and by the time you finish the course, you will have a strong foundation in how to read birth charts, as well as make predictions. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. I also recently launched a new course there called the Birth Time Rectification Course, where I teach students how to figure out your birth time using astrology when the birth time is either unknown or uncertain. You can find out more information about that at theastrologyschool.com. Each year, the podcast releases a set of astrology calendar posters for the coming year, and we've just released our 2023 planetary alignments and planetary movements posters, which are now available on our website at theastrologypodcast.com/store. There you can also pick up our 2023 electional astrology report, where Lisa Scheim and I went through the next 12 months and we picked out the single most auspicious date for each month using the principles of electional astrology. You can get that at theastrologypodcast.com/2023 report. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com. Finally, thanks also to the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening May 25th through the 29th, 2023, just outside of Seattle. This year's conference is going to be a hybrid conference where you can either attend online or in person. Find out more information at norwac.net.